Welcome back to Between the Levees. Today's episode will be a little bit different than my usual. Mr. Charlie Kulage Sr. is joining me today for the show. He spent 26 years in the industry, had to get out for reasons that we will discuss about 4 years ago. And I've not had his perspective or his story on the show before. So I'd like to welcome Charlie. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, for taking the time out. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. I'm glad you reached out to me, but tell me first, of course, how you found the podcast and the connection to a certain episode you discovered.
Yeah, I worked for the last company I worked for was AECBL, and a friend of mine that I've known throughout the years. We both worked at Memco Barge Line together. David Rains. He sent me a text one afternoon, and it had a link to go to see the interview that you had with him. And I watched it. I watched the whole. I didn't watch it all initially, but I watched the whole thing. It was a couple hours long, I reckon. And I just thought to myself, I thought, wow, it's pretty neat. I was really proud of him to hear what he's done, the accomplishments that he's made in the length of time that he has stayed out there. And because the river's not for everybody. Being away from home is not for everybody. I've seen some really good workers come come out to the river, and they would work really well, but you would know within about 36 hours or so, because you could tell it on their face if they miss their family and whatnot. And anyway, so it's not for everybody. And so he sent me this link, and then I saw it, and I thought, I wonder what this guy Tim is all about. And so yeah, I sent you the email to say if you ever wanted to interview someone who can show people what not to do as far as their career, then I'd be the guy to get a hold of. And you got a hold of me, so look at us, by God.
Well, for sure, but thanks again for reaching out. Your story is an interesting one, and it's like, as I said, very different from anything I've shared here on the show. Where did you meet David? And any good stories about time with him?
Yeah. Well, I met David at Memco Barge Line, and that would have been when I'm trying to think of year. It would have been 1998, I guess, because that was the year that the Joy Keller came out, which I don't know the name of that vessel now. It was the Michael Morris. Um, it might be a different name now, but anyway, the Mike Morris, when it came out brand new, that was the third of three, I believe, in that series that were for Memco Barge Line. The first was the Patricia Gale, the second was the Christopher M. Parsonage, and the last was Joy Keller. Well, I had ridden the first two, as they came out. I wasn't on the first two brand new, but and then on the third one, before it came out, they had asked, certain people, I guess, throughout the company, hey, you want to, and they asked me, and I was honored. I thought it was kind of neat to bring a towboat out from brand new from the shipyard, never even been in the water yet. Still had all the, there were like three or four of them 18 wheelers backed up towards, and we had to unhaul all that shit because furniture and everything a guy needs to live. So it was pretty interesting. We did that and lived in a hotel for, I forget, a week or something, and then and David and I were part of that crew. He was, at the time, he was second mate, watchman is what they call it, and I was deckhand. And by the time I left from there, he was first mate, and I was second mate, watchman. And so that's where I know David from.
Any good stories you can share of your time with him? Any pranks?
Well,
Any?
I don't know if they're good or not, but I know we used to like to cut up, and we used to like to. I mean, we would work our nuts off, man, and it would be hotter than a horse dream down, like, say, around Baton Rouge or something in the middle of the summer, building tow. And we'd get off watch, and we'd still go and take a shower, help Miss Linda Barrett was our cook, and we would go help her clean up the galley so we could pull out our coins and do some gambling. We played poker or whatnot, but David incorporated a lot of spades and hearts into the program. And so even though we were tired and done worked all day on our off watch, we would stay up a couple hours and play cards. This is before the internet and things of that nature. You know, we didn't have that. We just had books and each other kind of deal. And you know, I mean, I think about it now, and I'm glad I had that simplicity because it makes you appreciate the things that came along, like cell phones. And I mean, I thought I died and went to heaven when I got a goddamn cell phone, man. You know, that was like, wow, you know. So yeah, but yeah, that's and when I think back, there's a lot of good stories, I guess, overall. I know both of us like to cut up and and one thing's for sure about with David is we have a lot of things, I guess, that we have felt differently about, but we've always been able to agree to disagree at the end of the day. And seeing him with his daughters the way that he has been with them, and I have respect for Dave as a dad. So I'm happy to call him my friend. Yeah.
Absolutely, but and again, I'm glad he reached out to you. We're going to get into your career, but tell me about your childhood, where you grew up, what your parents did, and of course, what led you to the military. And then we'll talk through your military career that eventually, I think, led to the industry.
Yeah, that's so I grew up in North St. Louis, Missouri, in what's called the hood, the ghetto. And it was a pretty rough area. It was. Um, my 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 dad owned and operated Kulage's Tavern. Been there for a long time, and that's what he did. He took it from Grandpa Hatton, from his dad, and we lived right up the road. When I was a teenager, my folks moved to the county, and but my dad still maintained the business for a while after. And when they moved to the county, I another 2 years I was out of high school. I I did well. I did well in school, Tim. Oh, and my mom, by the way, you asked what my folks did. My dad owned and operated the bar. My mom put up with his shit, and she was a homemaker. And then when my little brother graduated high school, I think she found herself empty nested because she kind of went out and got a few jobs here and there. But other than that, my mom mainly was a housewife primarily. And I think I believe in my heart, people always start off with the best intent. Sometimes the results have other people question if that person had intent, but I say that because I think that my parents did the best they could for what they had, and where there's some things that really just didn't jive with my childhood. I mean, I'm not here to judge, but I think they did the best they could. And I think as we grow and learn and mature and technology and educate, that people learn differently. And so I'm going to say I had a decent childhood. Were there things that I could sit here and cry to you about? Sure. But I think all of us can, to a point. And so when we moved to the county, I wasn't at home much longer because I made good grades, Tim. I made straight A's, but I completed the 10th grade. That's the highest level of education, formal education, that I have. I was college bound in my mind. My folks thought I was, and I got into a little trouble, not academically, but the neighborhood was kind of rough, and I got caught with a knife, a butterfly knife that I kept on my person for protection. I had to park 2 to 3 blocks away sometimes in a pretty rough neighborhood to go to walk to school. And they installed metal detectors one day, or one night, I guess, and I showed up the next day and still had it on my person. As I was in line going through, I didn't even try to hide it. They found it and they expelled me for 90 days. And at that point in time, if you got an expulsion for 90 days, you knew you would have to redo that grade. And that was in my third week of my 11th grade year. So I completed the 10th grade, went through that summer, had taken my ACTs and all of that, 4.0 grade point average. And then 3 weeks into my 11th grade year, I was expelled. So I went and immediately I took my test for GED. I didn't really think I had many other options at that point. And I still don't know if I did. I don't think I did. I think that was my best option, was to go ahead and get my GED, because I didn't want to have to redo a grade. I mean, in a violent neighborhood, and I thought, screw this. But I also didn't want to put my family in a, what's the word, in an uneasy situation, because I knew from the way my dad and my old man were, was, if you go to school, fine, you live here. If you don't go to school, then you work and pay rent, or you don't live here, type of thing. I didn't ever want them to have to be put in that position with me, Tim. So what I told them is, yeah, I'm fine, I'm doing good, and I'm staying with my buddy John, when I was really sleeping in my car because of pride. I didn't money. I didn't have a job yet. And my old man and we didn't get along very well. And so I left home, and she became my first wife, but my girlfriend at the time, she's passed on now. She died 15 years ago. Anyway, her name was Erin, and she was my girlfriend. Well, I had done her wrong, and I'll never forget it, Tim, because I was 16 years old. I had these 2 tickets in my pocket to a James Taylor concert that I had bought for her and I to go to. She really liked James Taylor, and I had messed around on her and done her wrong, And that night, I guess, feeling sorry for myself, that here I'm out of school, I'm living in my car, no money. Now I got no girlfriend. I thought, why am I even still staying here? Because I had always wanted to travel. I had always wanted to see something besides St. Louis, and I had never been anywhere. My folks, if you had off time of school, you worked, man, for the family business. There was no vacation. We didn't have those things. So I thought, why am I still here? I had a big old Ernest and Julio Gallo wine jug full of pocket change, and my 1976 Pontiac, buddy, and I started heading east on Highway 70. I got tired in a rest area in Ohio, I remember, and I fell asleep in the car rest area. Well, to even see Ohio license plates, I'm like, wow, I'm in a whole different state. For me, this was neat. I was like, wow, man, there's a whole world outside of Missouri. I couldn't wait to leave St. Louis when I was a kid, just to see something. Anyway, I got back on the road, though, because I wasn't satisfied. It didn't look any different than Missouri. And then I was still driving easterly bound the next evening, just meandering the next evening. And when I started seeing, I guess, what would be the topography starting to change, with the mountains and the hills going on towards Pennsylvania, I thought, wow, now this is kind of neat. So I stopped that night in Pittsburgh, and I stayed in the city of Pittsburgh in my car in various places until I joined the United States Navy. From my car, I was living in my car behind a recruiting station. I had turned 17. I would just have to have my parents sign. I thought, shit, I'll join the Navy. That's what my dad did. That's what I'll do, because I thought, I know how to work. And if they're willing to feed me and pay me, shit, that's a good deal, buddy. So I continued to live in my car, and I remember I called home. And this is back before cell phones, So I called home collect, and I said, hey, Dad. I said, I'm in the recruiting station for the Navy, in Pittsburgh. And he goes, don't sign nothing. He said, and he says, I'm sorry. He says, I got a little excited. He said, I'm just saying, buddy, why don't we get a chance to talk first? And I said, okay. I said, because I'm going to need your signature. And if there's something that I shouldn't, I thought, well, I'll listen to what he's got to say, you know. But anyway, he kind of wanted to just make me aware. He said, I know I had a lot of fun stories. He says, but you would be going to boot camp, not summer camp. He said, so just keep that in mind. He said, but also keep in mind that if you were able to live with me, he said, the Navy will be a breeze. And boy, he wasn't shitting. All I had to do with the Navy is just whatever they said, you know. My old man, he was kind of difficult sometimes. But anyway, I had joined the Navy when I was 17 years old. And when I knew I had joined and I had that, I mean, hook, line, and sinker, right? At that point, I turned my 1976 car. It was about 4 months I spent in Pittsburgh. Then I turned my car around and I went back on home. I felt like I guess I I was able to return home to, I guess you'd say, from an emotional manhood standpoint, because now I had something lined up. You know, I was going forward with my life. I wasn't just living in my car anymore. But being 16 years old, 17 years old, not having a goddamn job, not having an establishment, you know, that's kind of tough to come by at times, man. You know, so I'm glad I did well while I did academically, because my ASVAB scores and all that, it put me in line where I needed to try to go, you know, to try to do something that was productive with my life. But my ideas of ever going back to school or going to college, they were out the window at that point. And like I say, also I got married. My first wife, Erin, she and I were 18, and 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 it didn't work out, but I had a lot of respect for her, and she did me, I hope. And she passed away when we were 30, when she was 30 years old. That was 17 years ago. 30 years old was when she died. She had a brain tumor. But yeah, so that's how I joined the Navy. And you know, don't get me wrong, I did it for reasons also that are underlying. I think all of us have that. I think this country is still a great place that is worth fighting for, you know. But my joining was not solely patriotic. Of course, I needed a job and something to eat. You know, I was living off a goddamn little Debbie's that I could get out of someone walking out of a grocery store when you're 16 years old. You know, you don't have anything, buddy, you know. And I'll never forget it, because when I got the approval, I guess, that I was going to get in, my recruiter, his name was John. He was a sonar tech. Here you go, Chuck. He had one of them voices, you know, sounded like he'd been eating rocks in the morning for breakfast and shit. And he tossed me a carton of Viceroy cigarettes. I don't know if they even still make them or not, but oh man, I could have given that guy a big old hug. That, and he bought some Domino's pizza. That pizza and them cigarettes, man, that was the first, you know, steady thing that I knew I was going to have for the next 24 hours for sure. So yeah, that's how I joined. And I came back home for a while before I went in to spend some time with family and whatnot, and kind of get ready, I guess you'd say, to make that transition. And then I went to my first duty station, and it was a co-ed ship. They didn't have, I'm sure they do now, but then they didn't have a lot of ships that were co-ed in the U.S. Navy. They were making them slowly and redoing the inside of them, but up until that point, these ships had been built for the idea of, especially the smaller that you got, to my understanding, because I'm not a construction or a structural guy, but the smaller the vessel, the more difficult it was to keep the genders where they could retrofit a ship from, say, the 1980s and make it to where they could coexist together without infringing on each other's privacy, I think was difficult. And so anyway, my first ship was a co-ed ship. It wasn't 4 months later they decommissioned that son of a bitch. And when they did, because I was married, because of this, I was one of the first guys of the deck crew to be able to look at the list of orders of what was available. And what I told, because you're on a phone, and literally you were in line on the pier with your supervisor at the head of the line, and he'll be there the whole, and you would get on, or you only had like a minute. You're on the phone with somebody from DC, Washington, DC, and you're telling them what you want. Well, I'm 18 years old. I'm thinking, I don't know what, or 17 years old. I don't know what I want, but I said, I know I don't want no more co-ed if I can help it. And so at that point in time, frigates were the last vessels, I guess, that weren't able to complement for co-ed. And I asked for that, and I got attached to the USS Rents FFG 46. That was a guided missile fast frigate, and it was a small. This is the smallest war vessel they make. Its primary job, is anti-torpedo and submarine warfare, but there were other things that it did as well. Being in a co-ed vessel my first 4 months, there was a little too much, I guess you'd say, political drama for me, that being ignorant to, I didn't want to get in trouble, I guess you would say, out of ignorance, little things that I thought, I just want to be on a ship where, and I know that it was probably for that point in time too, maybe, it seemed hard for me to be able to grasp the concept of some of those things, because I hadn't been in a workforce with ladies yet, But I did that, and for about the first, I guess, year and a half, 2 years, I got paid pretty much from the neck down. A lot of physical manual labor, painting and whatnot. That's part of the job. But on my off time, I've always been the overachiever, I guess, or the person wanting to grasp the golden ring, so to speak, with whatever I did in life. I thought, well, I'm going to get what I can while I'm in here, by God. And so I started going to every school I could for whatever our ship offered, And so I went to assault coxswain school. I went to the Mike Boat school, and I went to learn how to become a landing signalman for the aircraft coming in, for the helicopters. And then I started pulling those positions. And that's where you start kind of, I guess you'd say, getting a little more paid from the neck up but either way, it's still all work. You're all still there together. It's just different work. But that was, anyway, I told you the story. I just told you about how I was the overachiever, because what happened was, we were on a small ship, 200 of us, that there was only one other man qualified to do the things that ship was designed to do when we went over to the North Arabian Gulf, in terms of landing the helicopters, right, and all that. Because the Navy didn't fudge around with that. It's all black and white. You either went to the school or you didn't. You know how to do the job or you don't. And when that ship gets orders to go somewhere, either you have the crew members or you don't, I guess. So when we left on our deployment in 97, my friend Jamie and I were the two main shit stains for the jobs I just mentioned, for driving the small craft and for doing boardings and stuff of that nature, and for the helicopter stuff. And then I think it was about halfway over or something, Jamie had a family emergency. A family member died, and they flew him home. I forget from where, from Guam or Singapore, and got him home emergency so he could be with his kin, which is the right thing. I'm glad that they did that for him. But unfortunately, what that did was stick a big wiener in me, because what happened next was, when we got to the NAG, the North Arabian Gulf, that is, I'm sorry, the NAG is, I was the only one to answer them calls when that alarm would go off for landing the helicopters. And man, it zombied me out, because I had been wanting to go to this school. Oh, I got it all right. So I learned right then what sleep deprivation, fatigue, and all that shit's all about, buddy. Because I would venture to say that in the North Arabian Gulf, I think maybe I would get 2 or 3 hours in a 24-hour period. and that would be fragmented sometimes. And we would do that for 3 weeks or so. And then we would go in to replenish on some supplies for a few days. And when we would do that, I would tell myself, oh, you need to rest, Charlie. You need to just take this time and try to rest at this base in Bahrain. Shit, buddy, there wasn't no resting. I was 19, 20 years old, man. And they had $1 beers right there on base. Next thing anyway. So, I mean, especially after you've been out for 3 weeks, just giving it everything that you've got, you sit there and you think, how often am I going to be back here? I mean, what if something escalates, let's say, more than what it is between, the hostility? I mean, because you're in an intimate danger zone when you're there. You're in the danger zone. You're tax free. I mean, shit can hit the fan at any time, and we felt secure enough because we were on base, but that don't mean anything. Look at World War II with Pearl Harbor, man. Stuff can happen. So that sits on your mind, I think, to a point. And I thought, what if something happened tomorrow? I want to be able to say that I went out with a bang. So that's what I started doing when I was in the Persian Gulf, Tim, was I started looking for releases, I guess, that when I was off of work to take my mind off of work. And that wasn't sleeping for me, unfortunately. I've always been geared the other way. I feel like if I'm laying in bed, I'm wasting time, that there's something I could be doing to be productive, and whether that be partying or working. So I would go out and party and 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 exhaust myself, and I was still ready to work when the time came, but I would exhaust myself, and then I I found that when we came back from our cruise in '97, that I was having a hard time resting. I mean, I had some time when we came back from deployment. They gave us a month off. And so you would think a guy would get rested, but different things had happened. We had a helicopter crash and some other things that I found it difficult to rest. And when I would try to rest, my mind would just, it wasn't ever it was never easy. I've always been on edge since, it seems like, I don't know. But anyway, when that was, I started looking at, I guess you would say, alternatives to helping me cope, and that was drugs, alcohol. And after 3 years and 8 months, I was kindly asked to leave the United States Navy because of drug abuse. And that was pretty rough. I was rough on myself too right then, because I had worked from E1 to E5, worked my ass off. I had gotten a couple of accomplishments that I felt good about. Just to know that the guys are still here now is enough for me. I don't need their fucking awards, but I appreciated them anyway. But to know that I had done that and then put myself in a position to lose that job, which I hadn't planned on staying in, but I didn't want to get out on bad terms. I got I didn't get a what's called a dishonorable. There's a lot of folks that don't know the difference, but anyway, I got what's called an other than honorable due to drug abuse. So it's like I got fired instead of getting kicked out. But it was kind of a tough pill for me to swallow, because I had joined the Navy, I guess, in redemption of not finishing school. Here it is, I was getting asked to leave out of the Navy like I had school, and I couldn't stay there. I thought, well, shit, where am I going to go now? And I was home ported in San Diego. And I got into my truck and I drove all the way to the southern tip of the Baja Peninsula that night, 24-hour drive. And I left all my shit in San Diego, and my shipmates, there were two of them that were really And I still speak to them this day that are like brothers to me, that I hadn't told them anything. I mean, they knew what was happening, but what they didn't know, I guess, and what I shouldn't have done was just leave. I mean, these guys I had served with, man, they meant something to me and I meant something to them, that I should have been flat footed and told them, hey, I'm skipping town for a while. And I hadn't. So when they didn't hear from me, they figured me as dead. And I was gone 3 weeks, I guess. Once again, this is before phone internets and all. You remember, I'm sure that. So yeah, so my folks, my buddies, no one knew where I was. And here I was shacked up in this little village with dirt roads, man, off the outskirts of Cabo San Lucas with this beautiful girl. Oh my God. She was like something out of a magazine to me, but one of six people that lived in a one-room house, uh, different way of life, man, but a very happy family. I'm almost envious when I think of that situation now. And look at me, I'm in a full-size home. They didn't even have a full-size home, but they were some of the happiest people with life that I can remember. And so I guess I had literally ran away from my problems again, from the high school in St. Louis to the Navy. That was a runaway. And then from the Navy to Mexico, that was a runaway. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I came and tucked tail and came back home to St. Louis. I stayed with my folks for 2 weeks. And that that was enough for me. I appreciated their offer and hospitality, but sometimes my mom and dad would get into an altercation, and I put up with it a couple of brief times. I thought, I'm not going to try to rest in this shit. And so I drove my vehicle down the road, told them I was staying with Maria. uh, she's not even in my life. Anyway, I told them I was staying with Maria, but I was staying down at the end of the road, Grafton Ferry Road. I would roll my window down and put my feet out the passenger window just to have some air. It was in the middle of summer. And I didn't want to be around that kind of abuse, even listening to it. So I thought, I ain't gonna fucking stay here. And I thought, what am I gonna do? So I started looking, and I forget where I saw it, Tim, but I found an article in a magazine, because we had magazines back then. And I forget what it said that caught my attention, but it said something like, want to travel, whatever, and get paid. It was it was for I guess a company, an entity, that they sold a book. And at this point in time, now we're talking 1997, 90, yeah, it was $50 that you mailed off, and they would mail you this book via snail mail. And when it came in, is it gave you a list of all the maritime companies, I guess you'd say, that within the United States, including Alaska, that were there, that had job opportunities. And unfortunately, nothing really pertaining to, I guess you'd say, prior, military experience, but military experience surely would have paid off on a maritime level, is what I'm thinking. And when I did, I sent all that off. In the meantime, I forget who in the hell it was, but here I was, 21, out of the service, and it might have been a customer at my dad's bar, or someone that knew me when I was a lad or something. But somebody mentioned something about, say, hey, what about them boys work on the river? You might try to find you a union job, get you a union job. So I was looking, oh shit. And so I called, or went to, I can't remember, in South St. Louis, what they call the Brotherhood of the Sea, the longshoremen's, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I forget, but I went to their little place, and there was one guy there, and he told me, he said, buddy, the way our American flag shipping industry is going, he says, you're young. He said, I would give you a piece of advice. I said, I'm all ears, fella. He said, don't come here. He said, I would go inland, because inland, being an American, that because you have to be an American citizen to get a job on, and they're all American flag vessels type of thing. He was explaining to me at that point in time, like I really gave a shit. But I mean, now I find it interesting, but then I could have cared less. I just wanted to get a job. Was he said that within his industry at that point in time, you would have a guy who say had 30 years and who would be at a hall or whatever they call those places and have his name in a bucket to go to work and they would go. He says, but sometimes they'd have to go for much less pay than what they were ranked at, that the jobs just weren't there because they were selling ships off and they were flying foreign flag and they had their own crews. So I called, I looked in the white pages, I forget, and I got a hold of a couple river companies, and from there I just started. This is back when you write shit down. I just wrote everything down on notepad. There were a couple of names specifically that I got a hold of, and they were at the time probably at the capacity of what would be like today's, maybe like assistant port captain or a crew dispatcher that was willing to take enough time with me to tell me over the phone, hey, you might try this number, that. And so I did. And when I did, then a world started opening up to me to all these jobs that were open on the river, regardless of my military discharge, I guess you would say. Because like I say, it wasn't a dishonorable, but it wasn't an honorable either. And I didn't know if that would matter. Just so happens, I was never asked to show anyone my DD-214 in my life. But they do ask a lot of times if you've been in the military, whatnot. Anyway, I did that, and I went with what I thought. I called and I started interviewing folks over the phone, buddy. I mean, I called Mid-South, ARCO, ACBL, you name it. I called them because what I would do is write down what days on and days off and with their pay and their benefits and try to come up with what I thought would be the best fit for me, And I had it narrowed down to ARCO, Ingram, and Memco barge line. And I went with Memco. They were day for day, family operated outfit out of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And I went to work for them as a deckhand out of the Navy. Sure did. And I'm gonna tell you, I hadn't seen myself. I hadn't felt any desire at that point in time to ever work on the river because I really didn't know anything about it. I hadn't heard of it. I wanted to still be in the maritime industry, but I wanted to be a civilian sailor going open ocean, going over to Spain or going over to Southeast, wherever, because I guess that's all I kind of knew at that point was crossing the big pond, but also part of the idea, I guess, or the unknown mystique of being a sailor and not being bound by, say, the military or government, and to have the romanticism of getting off the ship and going into a foreign port with some gals that smell like old hamburger meat, but they love you anyway, type of thing. And all of that allured me, man, because I was wild, buddy. I'm gonna tell you, Tim, if you can kiss it, smoke it, shoot it, snort it, fuck it, or whatever, I probably have done it or tried a version of it. I'm not proud of that, but that's what made me who I am today. Some people say, well, have you found answers at the bottom of a bottle? Well, yeah, actually I have. I'm not going to say that it's the best or I condone that type of behavior, because I don't. But I do think that where a person is at in life, it's the uniqueness of that person is from their past. So, yeah, and that's what I wanted, man, because I didn't see me settling down or anything. So I get on the river though, and that was a whole different way of life. I thought, you know what? I thought, I don't know. I might just, I thought, man, 6 months out of the year, 12 hours a day. It's a lot better than what I had been for almost the last 4 years, which was, there is no schedule, especially if you're in a place like the North Arabian Gulf. There is, yeah, you've got watches to stand at certain times, but that doesn't mean that you're off when you go to your rack. You've a whole different ball game. And then 30 days of leave a year. I thought, man, 12 hours a day and 6 months out of the year. Where do I sign up? And I got on my first towboat on the Ohio River, and I was in a crew van with Captain Hugh Aldridge and Tony Stansberry and Marty Melton. And oh man, wow. And so we got on the boat, and I guess from that point on, I just started really kind of looking at more of, I guess you'd say, of the career choice as numbers. You know, what is the safest, and what can I, looking forward, where would I be better off, uh, and put my love tool aside, not think about my wiener. That was where I needed, I needed to stay on the river, and that's what I did, because better job security. I mean, a huge world of just, I think we spoke about it before you started interviewing me, Tim, was just a world that I hadn't even known was there. There was a lot of opportunity on the river, man. And come to find out that my discharge, it had, as a matter of fact, my service had helped me, because my sea time converted to brown water for 60% of it. So I thought, well, I'll start cracking the books, because, this was after I had maybe 3 or 4 trips under my belt, maybe about a half a year with the company, that I thought, if a guy's going to stay out here, there's only a few on the boats. There's only a few directions, and that is pilot house, the engine room, the galley to be a cook, or to stay here on deck. And I wasn't really ever mechanically inclined, so I knew the engine room was out of it. Cook wouldn't be a bad job, but I thought, if I'm going to be away from my family and working, I want to try to, while I've got the opportunity now, I want to try to get a pilot's license, because I don't think that later on I would be so well fit for that job. Because at that point, Tim, everything from my mind was still fresh. I had tested for a lot of the things that they tested for then. I don't know what they test for now, but what they tested for back then, I had tested for in the Navy. Same, different terminology a little here and there, but for the most part, the same shit. So I felt really fortunate, man, because I was going and seeing some of these guys and gals. There weren't many gals at the point in time, maybe 1 or 2 at the testing station there in Memphis, Tennessee, that it didn't seem like hardly anyone passed the first go around or two, or it would take them a while, because a lot of the stuff that was asked on the Coast Guard questions were more blue water related. And that's why I think for me, I was like, man, it'll be a breeze. All I got to do is a refresher, kind of, And within 6 weeks, when I became eligible, I wasn't eligible right away when I got on the river. After I had 2 years, I guess, with Memco Barge Line, is when I was eligible. I had the criteria to apply for, at that point, a master. It's now master of towing. It was a master's license. There wasn't the apprentice and the steersman and all that then, And so that's what I did on my days off. One trip, I thought, I'm gonna go knock this shit out, man. And I drove down to Memphis, and I took my tests. And in the Waterways Journal, Tim, the weekly publication that comes from St. Louis, there was an ad at that point in time, and what it said was, so I guess I wasn't alone, or maybe this anyway. It said licensed ? But need to steer in big bold letters. I thought, oh shit, because at Memco were good folks. But I was told right from the get-go with me, I inquired. I said, hey, guys, Captain Jimmy, and I'm just a deckhand off the blah, blah, blah here, but I'm going to work to get my license. That's, knowing what I know now, that's stuff that those guys heard probably every day, Tim, from lip service from different guys, that probably never followed through or panned out or worked out for them, that they would say that, I guess, trying to, I don't know, whatever, and it wouldn't transpire. But I told him, I said, I'm going to stick around, and I'm going to get my license and do the best job I can for you guys. When I get it, do I have a job here now? Oh, you go get it first. We'll talk then. Okay. So I went and got that son of a bitch. And I remember because I called the ad first in the Waterways Journal to ask and inquire. What that was for, by the way, was a spot here in St. Louis Harbor. And what the job that you would hire in for was a fleet boat mate, right? You would go 12-hour days, and that was your job, was on deck. But what the agreement was with me was that they said, if you have a license, we will put you with someone who's willing to let you steer between the fleets, as opposed to someone who's, and since you have your own license, we'll go that route. I said, okay. And so I inquired, and I told the guy, I said, I'm going to call first and see if they can do anything. I called the office and I got a hold of Jimmy Brown. I called him from a payphone in Memphis, Tennessee. And I remember because it was starting to drizzle and I had my license in my hand, brand new. I mean, right hot off the press. Boy, I could have. Anyway, I said, Captain Jimmy, this is Charlie Kulage. I don't know if you remember me or not. I told him, I reminded him who I was. I said, I got my license, Cap. I said, is there anything at this company, or should I maybe look elsewhere? And I told him what I had found out from that ad in the Waterways Journal. And what he told me was something I already knew, but he just reiterated. He said, well, he goes, we only keep two fellas in the steering program at a time over here, Charlie, and we don't cut one loose until they're ready, and we don't put someone in their place till they're ready. He says, you got a few guys in front of you. If you want to stay, he says, I will work with you, but I'm going to let you know. He said, from the offer you just told me, he said, I don't want to see you leave. He says, but if you'll go to work for them, you'll learn more in 6 months of running a boat than what you will here in the next year. Because he says you won't even be running a boat here next year. So I took my chances, and the reason I say that, Tim, is, and there's fellows older than me that would be able to probably give you a better insight to this situation. But when I first got on the river in the 90s, there was still a lot of what I'm going to use the word is clandestine type of cliques, that if you didn't have a brother or a daddy or a son-in-law or somebody that you knew, you weren't going to get your foot in the door to begin with, but you weren't going to get in a pilot house type of thing, It wasn't out of meanness or anything. It was just out of, if there's kin on the boat or something like that. So going back to that, I thought, I think Jimmy's right. I'm gonna take my chances. But if I did, and this is what he told me, he says, if you leave, he says, because I'll work with you if you stay. He says, but if you leave, coming back over here to get into a training position may not be possible. I said, I understand, Cap. Well, I appreciate the advice. And I gave my notice and I went to go work for Lewis and Clark Marine. And they stuck to their word. And I guess I had about maybe 9 months there. And what happened next was, I guess anybody would have left. I would have. Anyway, I went there for a $30 a day pay cut. I never bitched about it. I was trying to better myself, So I went $30 a day. I took a cut in pay. There were other men my age in my situation, I guess you'd say, that really didn't have a lot of experience, but had a license, but they had come up with Lewis and Clark with that company, right? With that tug outfit. This Lewis and Clark, the office administrator, they had paid for these boys to go get their license, paid for their fees, paid for their whatever's per diem. I paid for my own shit. And what they had done was said to the other fellas, we'll pay for it. You guys give us like a contract where for the next 2 years, you work for a certain wage. Even if wages go up, you work for this way. That's what they had signed because they sent them to go to school. I had about 9 months there, and I went into the office one day and I just asked them, I said, have you guys gotten any sort of report on how I'm doing? I said, because I'm still working hard. I'm busting my ass on deck, and if you say there's a chance at something, I'll stick around. But I just like to know if you're, and they said, yeah, why don't you come in next week? We'll figure something out. We'll get back to you. It's okay. And the next week rolls around, Tim, and I drove my ass over to Granite City, Illinois, where the office was. And I walked in, and what would be, I guess, human resources, probably what they call them now, and a porch captain and whatever. And then the owner was there, John Niehaus. Nice enough guy. But here's what John did was he slid me a couple of pieces of paper. I read it. And when I finished reading it, I looked up at the gentleman sitting at the table. I said, isn't this the same deal that you guys give to folks that you pay for their license to sign one of these? They said, yes. And I turned around, I handed it back to him. I said, I'm not interested, sir. I paid for my license. So we can do one of two things. I said, either you can reimburse me for the cost of mine, and I'll stick around and I might sign your papers, or I'll hit the road and go somewhere else. And that's what I did. Because what I felt was happening, there were enough guys with that company that had their licenses that I would be on deck for a while. And I didn't mind the work on deck. That didn't bother me. What I guess I was wanting to know is there something better than this? Is there something where I can try to move forward with an operator's perspective and get off the deck to start learning it? Because Tim, I hadn't ever ran a goddamn towboat at that point. Never. I had operated vessels in the Navy, smaller craft, but I hadn't operated something to that degree on the. I just hadn't. Where most, not all, but most, especially heavy tow pilots at that point in time, it was very rare that you would ever hear of a heavy tow pilot that had not been taken under someone's wing for a matter of time, at least for a few years, to learn things first. So I kind of had a unique path, I guess you'd say. I wasn't in a steering program, but at least I think honesty was probably my best policy. It probably still has been, because the first couple of jobs I had, I would tell them right off the bat, hey, I don't know this area, or I'm still very new to this, of trying to do this maneuver with a boat. I'll do the best I can, but I'm letting you guys know now, type of thing. That being upfront with that has probably helped me along the way, where some guys say, oh, I wouldn't have told them that, just bullshit your way through. Well, Tim, I didn't feel like that would be best, because you try to bullshit your way through running a towboat down the river with any kind of tow, someone's going to know. I can guarantee you now. And I didn't want to put anybody in that kind of a situation. The crew, especially, they don't know me. They're down there eating burgers and watching TV and whatever, feeling safe that old Captain Charlie is up there driving, that they're, you know what I'm saying? So I didn't ever want to shortcut any way of me trying to learn how to do something, if there's a right way of doing it. And so that's why I left, because I thought, I don't know how long I'll be on deck here. And I went to work for a fella down the road, small family operated outfit, on call. That sucked. But I did that. And while I was doing that, I would see all these boats going up and down, some heavy tows, some unit tows. And I thought, here it is. I'm sitting on this license to run anywhere I want in the United States, of course. I don't have a license to go overseas, but I do have a license to run what they call an inland. You have Western rivers and inland. Got an inland license. I thought, where do I want to go, man? I can go on the St. Lawrence Seaway or the Columbia River, the Snake River, where. And so I just thought, well, I'd like to get on one of these unit tows, I'm thinking, because, man, these guys, they're learning the river, but they don't have the same, they got a little more margin for error on this river than what they do, the heavy tows. So I started calling around to all these companies that I would see going by. I would take my binoculars and look. There's smoke, stack logo. And there was a poster that we kept on the vessel in the pilot house, and it would show you what company it was. And I'd find them in the Inland River Guide, and I would look them up, and I would call them, say, hey, man, you got any pilot spots open? And I got a hold of one that was Cenac Towing. You ever heard of them? Yeah. They were, and they were out of Houma, Louisiana. The guy got on the phone. At this point, I'd been in the military, been halfway around the world, but I could hardly understand this guy. He was speaking English, but I didn't know what his slang was. And come to find out, he was a coon ass from down there around Bayou Dulac or something, but great guy. And and he said, "How did you get our number?" And I said, "One of your boats was going by my workplace here in Missouri, and I asked that guy for your number, and he said you'd be the guy to call." I said, "I'm gonna let you know that you have a pilot available if you'd like to hire one, but I just don't know any runs. I don't know anything yet, but I'm willing to learn." And he said, "We don't send out applications." He says, "But if you're willing to come down here," he said, "I'd be willing to talk to you." And I'm thinking, boy, we didn't have GPS or something. I figured it up. I figured it up to be about 13, 14-hour drive going down 55 to Houma, Louisiana. I thought, I'm gonna go down there and prove that some bitch something. And buddy, I did. I drove down there and I found where they were. Snag, they were up on they're around the Houma Navigation Canal still. I guess they still are. That they were up on stilts, of course, or the hurricane ride, whatever you want to call them things. I went down the road after I passed it and I stopped and I got out because I had interview clothes, nice shirt, and I changed my clothes right there in my truck. I kind of looked around, make sure nobody was looking, because I got down to my underbreeches and everything to put on my slacks. I already had my shoes polished, and I went in and they made me feel right at home. Snack did, and they hired me. Great outfit. Benny Sinak owned it, and all the boats were nice and clean. We always had nice groceries, but what they didn't have was a travel program, so to speak. So anytime I had to go to the boat from St. Louis or come back, it was on my own dime, and I didn't mind that. Actually, I thought, well, I don't mind to stay down there and learn some of the culture, but it was hard on the pocketbook, and for trying to see family, you know. But I started staying. Is what I did. I started staying down on my days off. I was working 2 for 1. So instead of day for day, I've only got 10 days off. I'm thinking, and shit, I'm single. I'd get in my vehicle, which I was keeping in storage while I was gone, and I drive through all them little different areas of southern Louisiana, go over towards LSU, over to the college, you know, and just great atmosphere, great people, country people. But I put my name on a waiting list for Blessy Marine because same as Sinak, great company, but the difference was they had a travel thing set up, but they had a waiting list, buddy, because they just didn't have anyone dying off or retiring. I don't reckon that wanted. But they called me, and I put in notice at Sinak, and I went to go work for Blessy, and Blessy was at that point in time really I guess you'd say a godsend, because what would become my wife, she was pregnant with my son, that I I wanted to be able to get home as quick as I could off of a vessel, especially if it was in like Houston or something. With Sinak, it would have taken me either a huge paycheck to pay for the flight, or 2 or 3 days, or a couple of days anyway, on each end for me to go to work and come home. That would have left me like 4 or 5 days on the boat. And so, but I had already had it on my sights then, Tim, to try to get back on a day for day job, because that's what I had had with Mimco, and I knew it was possible. I saw how, I thought, man, why would I want to work 2 for 1? Because at that point in time, I guess it still is, in the early 2000s, the late 90s, it seemed like every unit tow company that pushed the petroleum sort of products was 2 for 1, 20 and 10, 28 and 14, 30 and 50, whatever, however you shake it or stir it. And I thought, man, this is for the birds. I thought, because there's another way. I thought, I'm working so I can have enough money to live. I'm not living to work. When my time comes, so I thought, if I'm going to have a son born, do I want to be off the vessel 3 months out of the year or 6 months out of the year, buddy? And of course, for me, that was a no brainer, because fatherhood has been the best privilege I've ever had in my life. But that's what I strived and worked for, was a day for day job. And I didn't give a shit where it was running or what it was running. I just wanted a day for day job to be at home with my son. and I took a job with Marquette. And I had never ran the upper going up to St. Paul with 15 empties in March out of St. Louis. Oh boy, pick up some of that good old wind and kick a man in the dick. But hey, that was a good job. And I ran the upper for 3 seasons with Marquette. And I was relief captain, I guess, on the Show Me State. And that's when I had bumped into, I don't think I told this story on the air, I'm not sure. I bumped into Jimmy Brown. Weird story, but long story short is I bumped into Jimmy in St. Louis. Jimmy still worked for Memco Barge Line. And I was day for day, finally, front watch job, running the upper, plenty of horsepower. I had started off with less horsepower, doing the same job. So I was pretty satisfied. And he said, Charlie, you want to come back over and work for us? I said, I don't think so, Jimmy. I said, I appreciate you asking, though. I said, because that's a fine outfit. Memco for me was a good outfit. They had high standards, I felt. He and Harold Dodd and Tim Sizemore, they would come catch the boat. And there was a lot of personable interaction and just, I guess you'd say, down to the basics type of learning. And Jimmy was hard, but he was fair, and he was different to some people in his own way. Either way, that I said, I don't think so, Jim. I said, I don't see any of your boats running the upper. And that's a problem for me. I said, because I just am at a point where I'm starting to feel like I know the upper. And I said, I got a front watch job on there day for day, man. I mean, give me a reason to leave. And this is what he told me. He says, you don't, if you'll come over, he says, I can't guarantee you it'll be immediate, but I will guarantee you'll learn the lower Mississippi, and I'll make sure that I have a hand in that for you. And I called, and I guess he's still alive, Kenny Wright. He was, although I was never a steersman, Kenny had been a mentor for me. He's a Vietnam veteran, and I had met him when I was a deckhand. That he had piloted, at that point, the massive tows, 40 barges. Like, wow, I mean, this guy, he'd been around, and I called him and I just said, oh, my phone's about to die. I called him and I said, Captain Kenny, I said, here's my situation. I told him what was shaking. I said, this guy, Jimmy Brown, says that that he's going to teach me to lower. I said, what do you think of that with what Jim Brown said? Is he trying to pull me or what? He said, although Jimmy and I have had our disagreements, Charlie, he said, I'll tell you that if Jimmy called me right now and said that the sun is shining, I don't need to lift up the blinds to see. So he said, in that respect, he goes, I think that you're in good hands. It was going to be a pay cut, Tim. I'm sorry, my device that I'm recording on with you guys, it's dying, I guess, but I've got it on the charger now.
No problem.
And so he's telling me this, Kenny is, and yeah, I guess it's gonna die, Tim. If it does, do you want me? I don't know if you can edit this out. Do you want me to call you back or get on? I guess I'll just have to let it charge if it dies. Anyway, it was going to be a pay cut. Ironically enough, $30. That's what I left Memco to take a $30 day pay cut. Now I was going to go back to them for $30 a day cut. But the captain I was working with at one point in time, that next boat trip that I pulled for Marquette still, I hadn't left or anything yet. Larry Thompson. I called him on the cell phone. I said, Captain Larry, I told him my situation because he was an upper pilot, Larry, strictly upper. I mean, as far as that part of it goes, he had learned anyway. This is what I told him my situation. I said, what would you do if you were me? I got a young son, and although I feel okay up here on the upper, my money's pretty decent. I feel like I feel like there's an opportunity here that if I don't take, I mean, what would you do? And he says, well, he said, Charlie, if I was your age again, I would do it. He says, because, and if you don't like it, you can come back to the upper. He said, because up here, he says it's a locking river. He said, so that buoy, and he pointed out the window. He goes, so that, I mean, over the phone, he goes, that the buoy, if it marks a rock dike today, it's going to mark it tomorrow and the next day because it's a pooled river. He goes, you go on a lower, it's a different animal. He says, I've never been comfortable down there. I didn't want to run down there regular, but he says, I think you'd be good for it because I just think you would be. And if you don't like it, you can come on back. And I took Larry's advice and I gave Marquette my notice, and I went to go work for Jimmy back over. Mimco was now being swallowed up by AEP, American River Operations, and which, I mean, there was a lot of growth in a short amount of time when that happened. That transition with that acquirement of Mimco, but a lot of the things were for the better, I think. That looking back in hindsight, great benefits, clean boats, and good folks working in the office that I had known since I was a deckhand. Just people that if you call and they say I'm going to let you know by the end of today, you could bank on it, type of deal. I enjoyed that about working for them still. So, and I still had that even once it became AEP. I felt like. But I went to go work for them, and I want to say he Jimmy right away put me on the Drew Lorette, which I don't even know what the Drew Lorette's called nowadays, but it's a 5,600 Jeff boat. It ran a little bit everywhere on the Ohio, the lower with 25, or whatnot. But it was what they called a utility boat, Tim. And like I say, going past Cairo Point, I had never seen it. I didn't really know St. Louis to Cairo. And that's a pretty tough little run if you ain't careful. I mean, that's 18 hours of sheer bullshit if you ain't right, type of thing. That we were going south, and Jimmy, I forget who it was that he put on first. It might have been Robert Bird. I can't remember. But Jimmy, when we got to Cairo, I didn't have to say anything or ask or whatever. Jimmy would put one of the older cats that maybe was retired, just looking for a little side cash, or one of the regular guys on their days off that wanted some extra money. I guess that they would come and ride south with me until we got down to New Orleans or Convent or wherever we were going. And that person would get off and I'd run north on my own. And started doing that. And I guess it was about a year later. I wasn't on there real long. About a year I was on there, that they asked me if I wanted to pilot spot on the Harry Waddington, which went to South America, heard it burned up. Either way, it was a 30 barge boat that they carried 35 in good river conditions. It was a 7200. It was an old relic, and but I got on there, and I met Mike Morris and Ronnie Callaghan. Those are a couple of the greatest guys I ever worked with, right there. Ronnie Callaghan and Mike Morris, and they do anything for a person, I felt like, because I was in a whole new world, and I think that they knew it. I want to say that I feel like in my heart that they had a certain amount of, oh, well, at least he's been standing his own watch type of thing, referring to me is probably what they thought. But I was honest with him and said, fellas, I don't know anything below Cairo. So anytime you want to tell me what to do or what not to do, I won't take offense. I will let it go in and rattle around. And if I don't like it later on, I'll spit it out the other side, but I might retain some of it. And I guess it was about 8 months later, give or take. Oh, I remember what it was too, was I asked Jimmy Brown one day. I said, Captain Jimmy, I said, I had maybe 3 months back over with the company, someone riding south. I said, Jimmy, how long you reckon it would take for a guy to be comfortable enough and to kind of, he said, well, Charlie, he said, usually like a new steersman or something, you can bank on about 3 years is what we hold a steersman with. He says, because they're trying to learn they're trying to learn the boat and the river, operating. He said, if you know how to run a vessel at all, he says, with that, and he says, I would imagine within a year, you'll be probably running your own watch. I said, okay. And it was 8 months later. We were getting ready to head south, and it was high water. We had already come up. We were getting ready to turn back around and go south. And Jimmy says, "I'm gonna get on and check ride you." He says, "Normally I don't like to in a flooded river condition, but if you're okay with it, I'll do it." I said, "Yeah, why not? Come on board." And he got off down at Helena, and I asked him as he was leaving. I said, "Jimmy," I said, "anything I need to know, Cap?" He says, "No." He says, "You're doing fine. Just keep doing what you're doing." And although I although I didn't on his time off, Captain Ronnie Callaghan, one of the captains I worked with, he it was it's like clockwork. People are habitual, I think, by nature, but he'd holler up the stairs when I would take the midnight watch. We'd relieve one another. He'd go out and get a sandwich, and he'd holler up the stairs on his way to his room and say, "Hey, Charlie, you know where I'm at, Cat, if you need me." And there was always that little seed of just, "Oh man, that's a good feeling." You run into an area where the weather's bad, or whatever it might be, that you could get a guy up. And I didn't want to ever abuse that, but it made me feel good to know that that option was there. So I didn't really, I wasn't a steersman, but that's not to say I didn't have folks help me, because I did, all of us do. I mean, you got to have help along the way. But I did that, and they sold that boat. It went to South America. When they did, pilot spot opened on the Keith Darlin. At that point in time, ACBL had two 40 barge boats, the Harold Dodd and the Keith Darlin, and they had a spot open, and I took it, and great boat, great group of guys. And there wound up being a gal on there before I left. But I left there in 2014, I think it was. They had been good to me at AEP, and Mike Morris at this point in time was my port captain. He and Kenny Underhill. That, I guess, just for a change of pace or scenery, doing the same bullshit, I thought, I'm gonna leave for a while and I'm gonna go trip. I think I was getting maybe burnt out of 8 wide going down all the time, 40 barges. The other thing was just a change of scenery. So I went, and I got, it was tough to get, but I got myself some disability insurance. I wound up getting $1 million life insurance policy and going. I didn't have an LLC, but I went into just tripping full time, kind of, and did that. And I'm gonna jump from then. I was self-employed. I didn't stay self-employed real long, Tim, maybe year and a half, 2 years. And there was just, sometimes it was just the uncertainty, or because I would be a trip guy, I knew that if work was short, they were going to give it to their own guys first, understandably. I mean, those guys are loyal to the company. So stuff like that started happening. But I was in contact with ACBL because it just so happens AEP got bought out by ACBL, and the same guys that I had resigned from, Mike Morris, and I wound up tripping back for them anyway. I was tripping for them a lot. So I thought, well, shit, I might as well just hire back in. And I did. And I took the pilot spot on the Harold B. Dodd, a sister ship to the Keith Darlin. And that was the beginning of this chapter in my life that you're looking at now. That was 5 years, 6 years ago, 2018. But here's what happened. The vessels, and you may or may, yeah, if you came out here in 2015, you may know a little, was they were going to become inspected, and the subchapter M and all that, it was all going to come to light. And and I guess being forced in June of 2018, June 2018. Well, when this was going to happen, Tim, there were to be a lot of changes, not just with the vessels and their regulations, but for operators and owners. They just had new things kind of coming into play that may or may not have been there before. One of them for me, and I forget all the details, but the long story short is, at this point, 2018, I had been on several medications, primarily for like your blood pressure and things of that nature, but also for some of them that were for mental reasons. Two of them were antidepressants, and one was an anti-anxiety, Xanax. And those medicines I had been on for a while, and so to find out that, truth be known, I don't think you should have been taking any of them to begin with. Is at that point in time, a person should not have been. But as long as you didn't take them within like 2 days of boarding the vessel or something, they didn't have any problem with it. You show up, you pee into a bottle. If it's within your first couple of days on a boat and there's traces of these medicines, I would assume they'd probably go ahead and just have you prove that you have a prescription and you'd be okay. Now, if they found it after you've been on a boat for, say, 3 weeks, then they would know you're taking it on the boat, type of deal. And when I had a primary doctor at that point in time that I think probably most guys that work on the river, if they don't, they will at one point or another if they're going to make a career, because the way things had been going, and probably for the best, is there are more medical requirements now. There are more things that the Coast Guard looks at for criteria, and they've gotten more strict. And I think, from my perspective, I can understand why. They want to make sure that if they give someone a bill of clean health, that son of a bitch ain't gonna, drop dead before a bridge in 5 minutes at rush hour traffic and knock a pier and then have all them cars driving into the water. It's public safety. But this is where I guess I underestimated, I guess, pharmaceuticals was. Talked to my doctor, and I said, well, Tom, I guess when I go back to the boat, I'll just stop taking those meds then, so I don't get in trouble, type of deal. Is that to say that I had never been risky before? No, I had been, but I tried to not make that a habit, So I stopped my meds cold turkey of what I knew couldn't be taken. And when I got home, I didn't continue to take it. I didn't start taking it. I stopped taking everything cold turkey. And that was in June. I guess it was in September, maybe ish. It was that fall, 3-4 months later. I don't know if that's because I'm not that sharp of a guy to know how these drugs work with your brain and receptors and all, but I didn't realize how much they were helping me until I had to get off of them, because we didn't get a lot of rest to begin with on the towboats. Work 6 hours on, 6 hours off. And I, like most people, I had one watch off where I slept, the meat of my 4 hours usually is about and then the other one be a couple hours to take a nap, and then I get up and exercise. But what started happening was I was having dreams, nightmares. I found out now they're called night terrors. If anyone, that's the technical term, but something I hadn't experienced before. But they were real life events, things that had happened that I hadn't thought of in a long time. And that has started affecting my quality of rest on the boat, because, Tim, if you're pilot and you're staying in the midnight to 6 watch and you're running on fumes, I don't care who you are, you do that without quality rest for a couple of days, you're going to start making errors out of just poor judgment, sleep deprivation. It's going to happen, and I would be a couple hours into resting maybe, and I would get up and my heart would just be pounding. It would physically just, and I'd jump out of my rack and have to take a minute to decipher what's happening, and I'd run right over to the window and open the shutters, and then come to my senses and say, okay, Charlie, you're on the boat. Everything's fine. You're not in trouble. You can calm down, and just try to talk to myself a little. But after that would happen, I couldn't go back to rest, man. I mean, you can't wake up from something like that. It gets you amped up and then go right back to rest. And it's not like you really get that rested to begin with. But on my days off, I was having the same nightmares. And I guess the difference was when I was home, I knew that even if I was amped up for a while, I could try to rest after, and I had a woman at the time, Sherry, and she would be in bed with me, and we'd get up, and the first while she tolerated it. And then one night, I don't know what time it was. It was in the middle of the night, 1 or 2 in the morning, but I woke up, and I guess that she had watched me towards my waking up, that knew it was coming, or that I got up and I went over to the window, and I couldn't catch my breath, but I sat back down, and she was rubbing my back, and she said, "Honey, I love you," she says, and I'm here for you right now, she says, "But this is out of my league." She says, "You gotta get a hold of some veterans program or something." She goes, "Some of the shit you're talking about is not good." And I felt bad because, I mean, even though I was off, she had to get up and go to work every day. So so to to try to adapt, I thought, well, I won't sleep. And so I started taking other things that weren't prescribed that could help me, I felt. And at first I felt bad about it, but then what I noticed was the dependence that was happening. Just to stop a few days before I have to go back to work, it wasn't working, because I would get to work and my body at that point would say, "Hey, dumbass, we can't function without that stuff you were giving us." And I had a motorcycle wreck in September of 2019, and I never lost consciousness or anything, but it's not very often you hear about a minor motorcycle wreck either. And I still don't know to this day, because I'm still learning about different things. I've learned a lot in this last year, but about medical things, but I don't know if I had a brain injury that night or not. I don't know. I do know I didn't lose consciousness, but I lost some blood, and anyway, where my head impacted, luckily I had a helmet on, because it was in bad shape. That would have been my brains, buddy. But 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 when that happened, of course, I had to take off of work. When you're physically when you're physically trying to heal from something like that, it's not like you can move around and do things to take your mind off of what your mind is on. So I went back. I continued to not only do what I had been doing, but doing more of it. And that was in September of 2019. I was healed up enough physically to try to go back to work in January. December. And I went back and I pulled one trip, a 4-week trip. And and I didn't take anything with me. I went el natural. And within like 2 weeks, the dreams were in my sleep deprivation. I was so fatigued. It was that I got off the vessel, and I thought to myself, my son, he's still always going to need his dad, but he's about grown and gone, almost a senior in high school. And, he had a thing going on at that point in time for getting some health insurance and some other things. I thought to myself, you're 40 something years old. Why don't you? I had never, Tim, at this point in my life, I hadn't never taken a break. I mean, most guys don't. I'm not saying that deserves for me to get a cookie. What I mean is I worked my childhood on my time off for Kulage's Tavern, or my grandfather, whomever, joined the military. I've always worked really hard for the things I feel like I've had. That I thought, why don't I just go on ahead and just take a break, take some time off, and take a hiatus, and say, just go live life for a while. If it means doing dope and getting it out of your system, or if it means going and taking a trip halfway around the world, whatever, and get out of your system and going back to work. And that was my idea. That was, that was my plan. I've always had a plan. I have not been in my life without a long-term goal. But when that happened, I didn't have the intent setting out 4 years ago to be in the spot that I'm in now. The spot that I'm in now, I don't want any pity or someone to feel sorry for me, because I've made these choices myself. But if I can say there's a silver lining, it is that I've learned a lot. I've been trying to stay on top of education for myself, just to say, why is this happening to me? Why is my body doing this? Why, and in the last year, the amount of money, of my own money, that I worked my whole life for to spend, because I'm not eligible for anything. I can't get any kind of government program. I made too much goddamn money, see, and I saved it away over the years. And what happened was because I've got all that, I've had to pay for everything, Tim. And whatever. But now the money is gone. I've been living on my own dime, paying my house mortgage and continuing life for the last 4 years. That a year ago, and a year ago, is I didn't want to necessarily stop damaging my body and my mind, but I had to, because physically it was starting to do things to me that have affected my quality of life. And one of them, some simple, just to go downstairs to my basement and to get a load of laundry and tote it up the stairs to these 2 floors up. I was never a marathon runner, Tim, but I ain't but 47 years old. I should be able to do that, man. I should be able to carry a laundry basket up without any problem. And anyway, because of that, I sought out and thought, a year ago, I thought, why don't I take what money I have left and try to find out what is going on, or if there's something that I can do to make a change. And when I made that decision to attempt to go that route, I found a good therapist. The first meeting my therapist and I were to have, my mom died that day. My mom and I hadn't spoken a year and a half because of my condition. And And I understand where my brothers and where people lost her as well besides me. But there's a whole different kind of sting when someone dies that you have purposely alienated from your life. So that was kind of rough. But what I liked about getting this therapist was I told him, I said, I don't know the answers, and I don't know that there is an answer, but I know that what I'm doing right now, if I do nothing, nothing will change. Nothing. I said, so I figure at least talking to you, fella, I said, that might give me an insight as to why these things have happened. And I mean, there are the obvious things for me that I look at in terms of choosing drugs over other things that I know are detrimental. And I knew that from the get-go. Unfortunately, I became addicted. And I guess it's the things beyond that that you start questioning within your own mind when you're the drug addict is, am I doing this right? Did I do something wrong here? Trying to make sure that you don't make that mistake again. And that's what I had been searching for and was searching for. He was helping me. And then I guess to cut to the chase was in the summer. My ex-wife, my son's mother, out of the kindness of her heart, she said she would come stay with me. Didn't want any money, or she said, I'll come stay with you and until you tell me that you're fine, and then I'll go. And so she did, because I don't drive or anything anymore, Tim, from anxiety and some other things. So physically, I forget what that word is, physiologically, whatever, is there are some areas on my insides. I don't, I'm not a surgeon or anything, but there's some areas that they ache and hurt. But she was here. I had been clean a while, and there was this pain in my left lung. And I'm thinking, so I let go a few days. She's at work one day, and I call my cousin. She lives down the road. And I said, I'm not feeling good about this. What do you think? And so she carried me to the hospital. They kicked me loose a few hours. And now, at this point in time, this is this summer, I had insurance. I knew it wasn't going to be cheap. Still, I thought I'll go do this and have them check it out because I couldn't breathe right. Couldn't catch my breath the correct way. They sent me back home that evening with antibiotics and whatnot. This was on a Wednesday in June. By Saturday, Tim, it felt like when I tried to inhale, my left lung, the bag wasn't inflating, is what it felt like. And it really was scary. I mean, I was like, oh. So Stace, at this point, I guess I had maybe got an infection along the way because I had a fever. But she took me on Saturday to the same hospital. This time they took me in and they kept me for a week, right? And they're running all these tests because keep in mind, for the last almost 4 years, I don't have a physician anymore, really, a family doctor. And you're going to have to help me stay focused on some things. And I want to come back to where we just were, but on the family doctor thing was there. I didn't know how strong it was, but there is a stigma that still exists that's pretty strong within society in general, but that I thought maybe I guess you'd say as a species, as a culture, that maybe we had rose above, and that was from medical professionals, because I have experienced that stigma from 3 people in my life in the medical industry, one of them being my primary doctor, after I came forward and said, yeah, I mean, I didn't ever lie to them to begin with. It wasn't anything I tried to hide. I said, look, I'm not doing my body right. This is what I'm doing. I would let them know. So that way they're not sitting there guessing and wondering. So they have the information. Once I told my primary doctor that, it was almost like a switch. And I've only seen it, like I said, in 2 other people. And he was one of them that
it's not anything against him. Or I thought I can't see him anymore, because anytime, there were two more times I saw him after I told him what was going on. There were two more times I saw him, that each time it was different than what it had been in the past, and he treated me differently. And I think that's, I'm not saying that people who are addicts should get special treatment, because we shouldn't, however, there are some medical things going on that, whether I've done dope or not, what makes you think that your shit don't stink, buddy? That's what I'm sitting there thinking about with this goddamn doctor. I mean, I don't care if you went to college for 8 years, I'll wipe my ass with that thing after I punch you in the head. That's how I felt. Don't judge me. You're not God and everything that's created. It just bothered me, I guess. So anyway, back to my story. Because I didn't have regular assessed, I guess you'd say, healthcare and treatment for the last 3.5 years prior to this summer, they didn't have much information to go on. But they did have my motorcycle wreck hospital visit. So when they did MRI and CAT scans of my body when I went in this summer, they were able to compare. So that gave them some area for starting to explore. I'm telling you that, Tim, because within a couple of days of me being there, they knew right away that I had something that's called pleurisy. Pleurisy is where you have, come to find out, is where I couldn't inflate my lung because there was fluid, on the outside of my lung, inside my body. And what happens when you have pleurisy, I guess, is that fluid will start to build up and expand, and it presses against your lung. To get to the root cause, to find out why. And when they started drawing blood and doing all that, man, they're coming back with all these specialists coming to my room, and the neurologist and this and that. All that's fine and good. So what happened was, they go to kick me loose. They had me on antibiotics. They get the pleurisy under control. That these 3 or 4 specialists, 3 for sure, the pulmonary, the neurology lady, she was Dr. Pan, and there was another person that they said, follow up with me in 2 weeks because we need to run more tests. You got some stuff going on, type of deal. I got home via snail mail. My insurance company, my health insurance company, had sent me a letter while I was in there wanting some answers. And I'm thinking, how do they expect me to give them answers via snail mail if I'm in a goddamn hospital to begin with? But here's what it is, was that they said, we're not going to approve your claim. We're not going to approve your whole stay in the hospital. So I'm reading this and I'm thinking, okay. And I read on. It's because they wanted, on their end, they want to know what the doctors found out, why they kept me for 7 days, and what they were treating. And Tim, from the insurance company's point of view, I don't blame them. If I own the insurance company, sure, all they were wanting was like notes from the doctor saying, okay, we're going to give this as a diagnosis or this. That's why you're spending your money, insurance company. They hadn't done that. The other reason, but one of the reasons why they hadn't done that, Tim, they didn't know what was wrong. They were still ironing that out. But I thought, $730 a month for someone who's unemployed to keep paying for my goddamn health insurance, and you're not going to pay the bill when it comes in from the hospital? It's like 30 grand a fucking day. Why would I keep you as my insurance company? I'm going to have to pay the hospital. People say, oh, all you got to do is pay them $10 a month on a payment plan. Bullshit. If you have assets, if you ain't got nothing, they got nothing to come after, you're fine. But if you're not poor and you have assets, retirement, whatever that is, they're going to come after a buddy. They're going to get it. So I don't have health insurance anymore because I'm not going to have them. Why would I? But what that also did was it kind of made me, and I know this might sound shitty, and people, if there's someone watching this, they might say, oh, he's just looking at it wrong. Well, maybe someone show me a different way to look at it, that I feel like now there has been enough damage that's irreversible, why would I want to keep spending my money that I've worked my whole life for just to fork it over to a hospital that I'm no longer at? I was there for 7 days. That once they're paid off, which by the way, I just mailed them their last fucking check. Once they're paid, I'm not going to a doctor. And I don't want to, I'm not trying to be stoic, nor am I trying to be what. I just think if there's something going on that's detrimental at this point, I don't know what it is or what it could be. It might be nothing. I don't know if it's cancer or I don't know what I've got. But I do know that what money I've got, I'm going to hang on to and try to just keep living here because I don't want to be in a hospital and die there. I found out being in a hospital, that's my one time I've ever been in one my whole life, was this year for 1 week. Was that although they are there to help you, yes, is that you don't get no rest there, buddy. And I have high anxiety with needles. They were sticking me like every 4 hours. I thought, why would I subject myself to going back to that? So I guess I feel like now is like it's kind of a damn if I do, damn if I don't. That's why I mean if something like, let's say, Tim, COVID, or you name it, any sort of ailment that a normal, middle-aged, almost 50-year-old guy would be able to handle. I don't know at this point that my body would be able to handle it just because my immune system's down. I've been isolated here for almost 4 years. I haven't, knock on wood, I haven't had COVID or any of that. Something like that would probably kill me, I would think. I weighed 240 at one point in my life. I weigh 160 now. The first 50 pounds of it I lost through exercise over a couple-year period on purpose. These last 20 or 30 pounds just kind of come off as I've gotten, I guess you'd say, not feeling good, But when I look back and I think what I have done, things different. I guess one of the biggest challenges I think about, or the biggest questions I've asked myself here lately is who allows their self to let themselves be so horrible to themselves and not care about themselves enough to say, well, because my son's gone, I don't have a woman anymore. It's just me. Why? And that's kind of the stance I took. And that's how I feel now, that because of that, I think that there has been a deterioration, that in your mind, if there's no hope, you kind of start losing hope, I mean, physically, I think your body does. And because I don't feel good lately, and I don't know what it is, but I know I'm not going to a doctor. I know I have a DNR sign on each door, front and back. Do not resuscitate, signed by a doctor. I don't want them beating down my door to come save me from a possible whatever when there's someone down the road who probably wants to live life a little bit more than me, who's got a couple of youngins that needs to stick around longer. That's how I feel, And the other thing is I feel like that if something like that did happen, it would be doing me a favor, because I don't want to be in a situation, or I know the situation, I guess, that can transpire, that will transpire from this, is I'm unemployed. I don't know who would hire me. I wouldn't hire me. Even if my enthusiasm's there, when I would get up or move, if I do get up or move within a matter of just walking into one room, a possible future supervisor, remember, they're going to be able to see that this cat ain't going to be able to keep up. I probably couldn't even get a job at fucking McDonald's if they were to hire me, because I'm not going to be able to keep up to the 16-year-old lad who's next to me on the fryer. I'm physically, I get down really quick, and I get I guess you would say, if I overexert myself, I get really lightheaded and dizzy, that no one's going to hire me. I'm not eligible for the government programs. I'm not eligible for food stamps or any of that shit. That my money is going to run out. my money that I've been drawing on and paying the penalties for is going to eventually be gone, because that was designed for 20 years from now. It wasn't designed to be tapped into now. I'm glad. I had a friend of mine that she said, be glad that you have that. Some folks don't. So I am fortunate that, yes, I've got that, but what that does is leave a bad taste in my mouth. What I worked my whole fucking life, and I saved to make sure that was part of my plan, so I would have something later just to give it all to, let's say, healthcare or a hospital or whatever. Because Tim, I am here to tell you one thing: I do not condone drug use. I do not think it's good at all. But for me, it's a shame for me to do dope and to live here is much more manageable financially than what it would be another route at this point. Because when the money's gone, I mean, I don't know how it works, but eventually I'm not gonna be able to make the payment on this home. They're gonna have to come get it. Where am I gonna go? I have nowhere to go. You know, that's not my son's responsibility. He's got his own life. You know, who who's gonna take me? I'm not gonna become a product of the state either, or of the government. That's a shit show waiting to happen. I worked for the United States government, and so I'm not going to do that as well. So my options have become pretty limited, and so what I say is make peace with what I have, and if there is something that happens, such as, let's say, a stroke or something, I hope it's fatal. I don't want it to make it to where it's puts me in a wheelchair or some bullshit where someone else has to come and tend to me, because my quality of life has already been affected. That would not be living to me. Some people, oh, what do you mean? At least you'd still be around. No, I know what it's like to have something different. You know, I'm not gonna live that. I'm not gonna live that. And that's not even living anyway. How am I supposed to live? Then I'll be eligible for government programs probably at that point. But I would still have to apply, still have to go through the waiting periods for all these different places. And for what? I'm crippled. I say crippled. There's something wrong. I don't know what it is, but I'm not gonna hold my head or stick it up high either. I'm just gonna say it is what it is, and here I am today because I made choices, poor choices, obviously. And remember, I said at the beginning of the podcast, Tim, that like with my folks, overall, I think my folks did the best job they could. They had the best intent, and that's like with me. Does anyone intend to quit the job force 20 years too soon and be unemployed and run out of money and be physically disabled and have no one and be alone? I didn't intend for this to happen, but it did, you know. And you know, you hear all kinds of different scenario or mindsets of people's psyche to say, well, if a person's in a situation, they put himself there. Yeah. Or you wanted to be there, they'll say, you know, if you're in a certain place in life that's kind of shitty, oh, well, that person wanted to be there. I got to tell you, I didn't plan on being here. I didn't. I'm not going to say that I was so naive to think that there weren't consequences. I knew there would be consequences. I knew that. And I'm accountable for that. And I'm here to tell you as a man that I'm sorry that that's what happened. And I'll fess up to that's what I've done. But that's kind of where I'm at in life these days. The days of ever going to work on the boats again, ever having a job again. It's just a thought. It would never happen. And I wouldn't be able to on the vessels anyway. Once the way that things have gone and with the Federal Register and what, you know, the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations now, once you have documented what's considered to be anything, you know, mental, I say anything, there's certain things you can't go back to work in a capacity of being a licensed mariner and do that. But I accept that. That's part of my consequences. And all I can say is while I did work on the river, I met some great guys, and it was good to me because that was the job that here it was. I wasn't even a high school graduate, but I was making six figures a year for almost 20 years, man. That's pretty good from a kid that came from North St. Louis, but also that didn't come for nothing. I worked my ass off for that and worked really hard. So, it was here, and now it's gone. But I do know in my heart, I wouldn't personally, me at this age and at this point, I wouldn't ever be able to go train for another job and ever have that income again. Not from a legal standpoint. I mean, it just wouldn't happen. So then I start to be mean to myself again, and think down on myself, because I am my own worst enemy. But more than anything is I'm hard on myself, and I say almost that I hate myself. Hate's a strong word. Hate and love both are, but why would I allow myself to do this to me? But you can't get away from yourself. So I'm glad I'm able to share this with you now, because I don't know what the future holds. And I'm gonna be honest, like I say, not to sound sad or pitiful, I hope it doesn't hold a lot, because this is not living to me. I think even what family still sees me, which is my son, and what that from what they see, that they know from the old me, I guess you'd say, that this is not how I want it to be. This sucks, man. So um I guess if there's anything that I could try to pass on to anyone working on the boats that is struggling with addiction or any sort of flashbacks from the past, say, that keep you on edge, that don't allow you to rest, is that you're not alone. But I would say more importantly is you might want to check yourself before you get on a boat, because of that is why I'm glad I did quit. So I wish I still had the income. Sure, who wouldn't? And I wish that I could say that none of this happened. But for the better of public safety and for them guys on board, I'm glad I resigned, because it was a matter of time before I would have an accident that it would have been bad enough if I would scatter a tow and get a few barges adrift or whatever. But if I were to get somebody hurt on that boat, one of them guys that I'm working with, because that's not just guys you work with, that's your family, man. I mean, you live together as much as you do with your family. That you get one of them hurt and you were on watch, and it's because of something you did and you had dope in your system, I wouldn't be able to live with myself, man. So I'm glad I quit for them boys, because they deserve to have someone up there who's got all their marbles going on. And I was playing with fire, man. Playing with fire.
Well,
It's
Charlie,
probably a lot to swallow, man. I'm sorry to.
no, not at all. I appreciate you coming on and sharing the story. Like I said at the beginning, this is not a perspective I've had. Um, I'm glad the industry was part of your life long enough that you could establish that nest egg to get to this point financially and be able to make your own decisions, decide your own fate to some degree.
Right.
But
Yeah. Right.
I'm curious how this episode is going to be received.
Yeah, I got you. Well, I know it's well, yeah, I mean, hopefully, like I say, because I'm gonna tell you, Tim, I haven't done something like this, like an interview. I call this an interview, but I learned what about, well, it was a year ago. I told you I decided to go into to give myself a try for the first time to try recovery. And a friend of mine, she lives in Arizona. She sent me a book, and anyway, she um oh, sorry, it messed up my train of thought. I was thinking about her for just a second. It'll come back to me. Shit, it had something to do with. You might have to edit that part out. I can't remember now. Anyway, it's with Christina. It'll come to me before we get off the line here. Oh, podcast. She's known me since we were in high school together. This gal. Matter of fact, when I got caught with the knife, she staged a walkout the next day with the high school. Okay, she's that kind of friend, right? Anyway, she she oh man, my memory is bad, Tim.
You were mentioning podcasts, I think. Was that
Yeah,
related?
yeah. She said to me it was something. No, either way, she says, Charlie, I want to try to introduce you to something because I'm not a religious person. I'm not spiritual, unfortunately. I wish I was. I want to believe in something, but I don't. Maybe because I've been searching, I've been looking, thinking maybe if there's something to look forward to, that it would give me a smile on my face, at least as I'm checking out, to think there's more to life than this. But anyways, that she said, here, I'm going to send you a thing and you can go on Spotify and there's my podcast. And I said, what's a podcast? And she goes, you know what? And she thought, I think at first she thought I was bullshitting her. I said, I don't know, Christy, because Tim, in the last 4 years, almost, I don't watch television, don't watch the news. I, unfortunately, there are I've learned now they're called triggers. There's things that'll come on the TV that they make me break down, let's say, and they make me cry. So I stopped watching TV 4 years ago. Well, the other thing is with news, like you were asking about SCF and all that, is I don't follow current events at all. So I'm thinking this podcast must be something kind of neat. Well, come to find out now that podcast can be an interview, or hers was I guess you'd say strictly audible, where I could get on there and listen to this music, almost like deep theta or like beta, something to relax me and let me just focus on that and do some mindfulness and kind of get regrounded, so to speak. Is when I first started all this. But yeah, that's the first time I ever heard of a podcast. So this is my first time telling my story to anybody. And part of that is because before now, or up until I guess this period of this chapter of my life, there was still a small hope or glimpse, maybe, that if things aren't documented medically, and I really haven't, I can go back to work on the vessels, is what I was thinking. Part of that would be, I'm not going to say to be dishonest, it would be withholding information if I had decided to work. That at this point, that's why when I contacted you, I thought, I'll tell you anything you want to know, because I don't see any coming back from this, unfortunately. Because if I did, I'd still probably have it under my lid. I wouldn't lie to you, but I wouldn't have even considered doing something like this, because I'd be afraid that, hey, did you hear Kulage told his story? Oh yeah, well, he just applied for our company 2 days ago. That's not going to happen anymore. So at this point, when you kind of get stripped from all that, it makes you feel like, I don't know, like, hey, I'll tell you anything you want to know. I have nothing to lose, But I mean, I do have things to lose, but all the big ones are gone. I've done lost them. My woman, she's gone. I don't blame her. I wouldn't want to be around me either. It sucks being around me. I can't get away from myself, though. I've tried. It's not that easy.